Emily, let me start with you and just kind of get your reaction of what we heard from the senator there when it came to negotiations on reconciliation.
I was encouraged that Senator Hirono kind of started with the end in mind by saying we're going to get to a deal. We're going to pass both bills, infrastructure and reconciliation. So I think starting with that is the best place that we can be. I think the political downside for Democrats to walk away from this is disaster. People who voted for Democrats, Democratic base, women who don't necessarily vote for Democrats, independents who did usher them into power, both in the presidency and in both houses, need to see results. Like voters, women in particular, they need to see what is in this bill. Yeah. They need to see support for childcare. They need to see paid leave. They are making choices whether to stay in their jobs or look at different jobs. And they need to know that they're going to be able to leave either to have a child for a second parent or to take care of a sick family member. That has become incredibly clear. They need to see Democrats taking action on them to continue to stand up and support for them. I also supported Senator Hirono's comments for the senators who were holding up this bill to be clear about what their bottom line is. Then we can move forward and we don't have headlines like Democrats in disarray. Like, let's negotiate like negotiations go. You say what you want, I say what I want, and let's get to a deal.
I've seen that headline quite a bit, I got to say. Charlie Sykes, do we actually think the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party would allow the hard infrastructure bill and the reconciliation to sink?
Well, that's an excellent question, because this would be a really bad time, wouldn't it, for the Democrats to implode? Look, the bottom line here, and I agree with Emily, this would be a disaster if these bills, if they got nothing out of it, because if Democrats really believe that democracy faces an existential challenge, that we are in the midst of this rolling assault on our democracy, then the Democrats need to act like it, as opposed to playing a game of political chicken that could result in political catastrophe. You know, the reality is, you're asking, why Democrats are having a hard time with this, is because, look at, I'm just doing the math. Yeah. The Democrats may control the three branches of government, but they do not have the progressives do not have a governing majority. They may want to have an LBJ-like agenda. They may want to have a new deal, but they just don't have the numbers. And I think Joe Manchin made that point last week when he said, you're probably just going to need to elect more liberals. You're going to have a bigger progressive caucus. I also think that it's important to point out that despite all the focus on Manchin and Sinema, there are moderates, there are centrists in the House who also object to some elements of this and who are furious at this game of political chicken that has resulted in not getting the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And I have to tell you, I'm getting real Freedom Caucus vibes from some of the things that are going on right now. And you ask the question, would they be prepared to blow themselves up? Well, we've seen this happen in the past.
Wait, Charlie. You just said a lot of stuff that kind of... I'm going to really need to dig into, so I got a couple notes here. And then, Emily, I want you to weigh in. Okay, so first you said act like it. Democrats need to act like it. I want to know from your perspective, Charlie Sykes, as to what you mean by that.
Well, number one, keep in mind that if you fail at this, you not only don't get your agenda, you get a Republican Congress in 2022, and you get a second Donald Trump term. And I think that this ought to be a real sobering moment here. They're on the 1-inch line of a massive bipartisan infrastructure bill, got 69 votes in the Senate. They could pass that. They should have passed that last week, put that on Joe Biden's desk, and then messaged it. As a result, in contrast, they're fighting with one another right now, and the messaging is terrible. People don't know what's in this bill. They're not focusing on it. They're not having public hearings on it. They're not having votes on it. They should call this the American Family Plan as opposed to the reconciliation bill. So I do think that people need to understand really soberly what the consequences of a democratic civil war right now.
To be fair, Emily, right, the Progressive Caucus is essentially saying, listen, if we allow this vote on infrastructure, then we're not going to get anything done when it comes to reconciliation. So if we pass these things in tandem, at least the priorities we have in reconciliation can get done. And now it seems the president is even on board with passing these things in tandem. Charlie makes obviously a valid point, as Charlie Sykes would, but that is what we're hearing from the progressive side. And the president, being the leader of the Democratic Party, also in lockstep with that?
It does seem that everyone in power is on that page, that both infrastructure and reconciliation, which is human infrastructure, which includes the pieces like child tax credit, paid leave, environmental pieces, healthcare, like that will pass. Like, that was an initial negotiation point, I think, from the Progressive Caucus. And I think they won. Like, I think that point is going to happen. It doesn't seem like anyone's going to walk away from it. And I think part of what, look, this is negotiation to the max. Like, you have to be an expert here. And I think, although they're doing it in public, which I do not think is going that well, I think there should be more negotiation in private. But I do have pretty good faith here in Pelosi as the speaker, as the expert to be able to handle negotiations. We do know that she has been not just at the table, but she's really been pushing a lot of those agendas, those agenda items that are so important to Democrats, why voters voted Democrats into power in the first place. So I don't see her walking away from it. I don't see Biden walking away from it. I think that those two pieces are going to move. I do think, to Senator Hirono's point, the question is now what funding levels go to each of those pieces. So to be specific about, what she had talked about, you say, we need to tell people what's in the bill. On something like paid leave, the question is, if we're proposing 12 weeks, do you start with 12? Do you start with 6? Right? Like, is it funded for 10 years? Is it funded forever? Like, those are the kinds of questions as to where the funding levels go. And that conversation, I think they should be having more publicly, not the we want this, you want that level.
Okay, we got one more thing we need to talk about, and then I got to wrap this thing up. Although I'd like to go on for the next hour. Nonetheless, Emily brought up Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, Charlie, and I want you to weigh in on that, because I was speaking to Jonathan Allen on my show yesterday, right? And there was this idea that as Speaker Pelosi is going to be done at the end of her term, she's not going to seek being a speaker once again. In a way, she's kind of losing her influence when it comes to negotiations and her mojo as well. And then there is this whole idea of a kind of erosion of trust that Senator Kyrsten Sinema brought up in her scathing statement from yesterday. And I'm wondering if you could weigh in on that, along with the influence that Speaker Pelosi still has.
Well, that was one of the things that actually worried me, because I think that Speaker Pelosi, who is a legislative, mastermind, she had a plan last week. First of all, she had promised the moderates that they were going to have a vote on the standalone infrastructure bill. She was clearly pushing for that. She said, we cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We can't link these together. And then the Progressive Caucus cut her off at the knees, and I'm afraid that Joe Biden has also pivoted away from her. So to the extent that she is losing some of her credibility, this, again, I said, and I'm going to get blowback from this, the Freedom Caucus vibe, what they did to the Republican speakers, where they basically were saying, we're not going to go along with you, and we are prepared to put you in a position where you break your promises. And this is an important point. If you're going to have negotiations, everybody's got to trust one another. And I'm getting the sense that right now there are people on both sides of this divide, both the progressives and the moderates, who are really questioning whether they can trust the promises that are being made. And that's a dangerous moment in politics, particularly when the margins are so thin. So look at Kyrsten Sinema's statement, but also the statement from one of the leading centrists in the House of Representatives, and they're furious. So you hope that this will be decided by the grown-ups in the room, that will be decided on the basis of good public policy. But I'm sensing that there are some troubling personal dynamics growing right now.
Can I also point out, we are only talking about Democrats. If a Republican actually wanted to have impact on legislation, this would be an excellent point for them to swoop in and say, I'll vote with you guys, put my favorite piece in. They're not doing it.
Exactly.
They don't want to vote with Democrats.
Yeah, well,
they could do it.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen. Emily, Charlie, thank you to you both. I appreciate it. Coming up, everybody.